Good morning/afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our exploration of one of the most fascinating figures in medieval English literature. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the life and works of William Langland, the medieval English poet behind Piers Plowman. Our focus will be on his contributions during the 14th century, roughly from 1332 to 1386. We'll look at his literary achievements and the impact he had on the development of English literature. So, let's get started and uncover the story of this remarkable poet and his enduring legacy. Now, let's take a quick look at slide 2, which covers the summary and further reading. This section is designed to give you an overview of the main themes and ideas we'll explore in this presentation, as well as guide you toward additional resources if you're interested in delving deeper. You'll notice it starts with legacy and influence, highlighting how Piers Plowman has impacted later literature and cultural thought. Then, we have authorship controversy, which touches on debates surrounding who actually wrote the poem and its historical authenticity. Moving on, religious and social commentary emphasizes the poem's critique of society and its reflection of religious beliefs during the medieval period. Next, language and style points to the distinctive poetic techniques and vernacular used by Langland, making the work accessible yet complex. Allegory and literary devices reminds us of the rich symbolism and figurative language woven throughout. We also see themes in Piers Plowman, which are central ideas like social justice, morality, and spiritual awakening. The three versions, A, B, and C texts, show how the poem evolved over time and how different versions offer varied perspectives. Then, Piers Plowman Overview provides a broad summary of the work itself, and historical and literary context situates the poem within its time, helping us understand its significance. Finally, who was William Langland? Invites us to learn more about the author behind this influential piece. Overall, this slide ties everything together, giving you a roadmap of what's to come and resources for further exploration. Let's explore who William Langland was, focusing on his life, origins, and his sense of identity. William Langland is a somewhat mysterious figure, largely because very little is known about his personal life. What we do know is that he was a poet from medieval England, and his work has had a lasting impact on English literature. His origins are believed to be rooted in the West Midlands, possibly around the area of Piers Plowman, which is also the title of his most famous poem. This connection to a specific region helps us understand some of the cultural and social influences that shaped his writing. As for his identity, Langland is often seen as a representative voice of the common people, reflecting their concerns, beliefs, and social realities. His work emphasizes moral and spiritual themes that resonate with the everyday life of ordinary folk. Overall, William Langland's life and background are integral to understanding the themes and perspectives he presents in his poetry, which continue to be relevant today as they give us insight into medieval society and the human condition. Let's take a closer look at William Langland, the author of Piers Plowman, which is considered one of the greatest Middle English poems. He was a minor cleric, likely in minor holy orders, and may have also worked as a scribe. His occupation suggests he was involved in religious or literary work, probably connected to the church. Langland was educated in a monastery, with some scholars believe he studied at Great Malvern Priory. This educational background would have provided him with the literacy and religious knowledge reflected in his work. Regarding his life timeline, it is believed he was born around 1332 and lived until about 1386. We think he spent his later years in London, around 1386, where he might have been involved in various literary or clerical activities. As for his origins, he was likely born around 1332, possibly in Cleobury Mortimer in Shropshire or somewhere in the Malvern Hills area. These regional connections help us understand his background and the cultural influences that may have shaped his writing. Overall, William Langland's life spanned the mid-14th century, and his experiences as a cleric and educated individual greatly influenced his masterpiece, Piers Plowman, which reflects the social and religious issues of his time. Now let's look at the age of Chaucer, which marks a real flowering of Middle English literature. This period saw the rise of the vernacular language, English, over Latin in literary works, making literature more accessible to everyday people. Chaucer himself is a prime example of this shift, using English to reach a broader audience. During this time, figures like John Wycliffe challenged the authority of the Church, spreading early ideas that would eventually influence the Reformation. Wycliffe's calls for reform and his translation of the Bible into English helped set the stage for religious change. It's also important to note that writers like Langland wrote for the common English reader, not just clergy or scholars. This shows a growing interest in literature that reflected the experiences and concerns of ordinary people. Now let's consider the broader context. This was a tumultuous time for England. The Black Death, which swept through in 1348 and 49, devastated the population, killing about a third of the people. Such a huge loss of life had profound social and economic impacts. Then there was the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, which challenged the social hierarchy and forced people to think differently about authority and rights. At the same time, the 100 Years' War with France, lasting from 1337 to 1453, drained England's resources and created ongoing conflict. The Church itself was facing widespread corruption, leading many to call for reforms and question its authority. All these factors, social upheaval, religious questioning, and political conflict, shaped the environment in which Middle English literature flourished and helped define the themes and concerns of the period. Today, we're going to take a closer look at one of the most significant works from the Middle Ages, Piers Plowman. This piece is often considered a masterpiece of Middle English literature, and it really offers a deep insight into the social and spiritual issues of the time. Piers Plowman is not just a story. It's a complex allegory that explores themes like morality, religion, and social justice. It's written in a way that encourages reflection on personal virtue and the state of society. What makes Piers Plowman especially important is how it challenges the status quo, questioning authority, church practices, and the idea of true righteousness. It's a reflection of the widespread desire for reform and moral clarity during that period. As we move through this presentation, keep in mind how this work connects to the overall theme of examining medieval literature's role in shaping societal values and individual consciousness. Piers Plowman is really a mirror of its time, and understanding it helps us appreciate the richness of medieval cultural and spiritual life. Now, let's take a closer look at Piers the Plowman and its background. This work was written roughly between the 1360s and 1380s, and interestingly, there are 3 different versions that developed over those decades. The central character is Piers himself, an honest laborer who ultimately becomes a Christ-like figure, embodying virtue and humility. The narrative is built around a series of dream visions experienced by a narrator named Will. These visions serve as allegories, exploring deep themes through symbolic storytelling. The poem is quite lengthy, with around 7,000 lines in the B-text, and it's divided into sections called passus, which you can think of as steps or cantos. Language-wise, it's written in Middle English, specifically the West Midlands dialect, which was common in that region at the time. The verse form is alliterative, meaning it uses alliteration rather than rhyme, and it's unrhymed but stress-based, giving it a distinctive rhythmic quality. Structurally, Piers the Plowman is a classic example of a dream vision and allegory, 2 literary devices that allow the poet to explore complex ideas about Christian salvation, social justice, and what truth really means. It's not just a story. It's a reflection on morality, society, and spiritual salvation, wrapped in a poetic form that invites the reader to ponder these themes deeply. In essence, this poem is a long, allegorical reflection of 14th century concerns, faith, morality, and justice, all conveyed through vivid dream imagery and symbolic language. Let's take a closer look at the different versions of Piers Plowman, specifically the A-text, B-text, and C-text. These are essentially three different versions or iterations of the poem that emerged over time. The A text is the earliest, and it lays the foundation for the story and themes. The B text came later, expanding on the original, often adding more detail and complexity. And finally, the C text is the most developed, sometimes reflecting the poet's evolving ideas or responses to contemporary issues. Understanding these three versions helps us see how the poem evolved and how its themes were refined or expanded upon. It also highlights the way medieval texts could change and adapt over time, depending on the audience or the poet's intentions. This is a great example of how literature isn't static. It's a dynamic process, much like the ongoing development of ideas we see today. So, when we analyze Piers Plowman, keeping these versions in mind allows us to appreciate the richness and complexity of the text, and how it reflects the social and spiritual concerns of its time. Let's take a closer look at the three main versions of Piers Plowman, starting with the final revision, which is roughly 7,300 lines long. This version is less dramatic, but it's more theologically precise. It also smooths out some of the more controversial passages, though it might be unfinished at the time of Langland's death. Scholars are still debating whether this final version actually improves or diminishes the original B text. Next, we have the C text, written around 1385 to 1386. This is the most widely read and studied version, consisting of about 7,200 lines. It features a major expansion, adding sections known as the Vita, and it deepens the theological complexity. Notably, it introduces the triad of do well, do better, and do best, which are key moral themes. This version is generally considered the definitive one. Finally, there's the B text, from around 1377 to 1379. It's the shortest of the versions, with about 2,500 lines. It introduces the prologue and the first 11 passus, laying the groundwork for the story. It sets up the framework of the field full of folk and the dreamer will. Many see this as a draft or an early experiment, kind of a testing ground for the ideas that would develop later. Understanding these versions helps us see how Piers Plowman evolved over time, reflecting different theological and literary priorities. Each version offers a different window into the poet's creative process and the social concerns of his era. Let's take a closer look at the prologue, titled The Field Full of Folk. Here, we get a panoramic view of medieval society, which includes nobles, clergy, laborers, and merchants, basically the entire social spectrum of the time. It's a way of setting the stage for the moral and spiritual themes that follow. Moving on to the Visio, or the Vision, which covers passus I through VII. In this section, Lady Holy Church appears and explains the concept of truth, emphasizing its importance. We also see Lady Mead, representing bribery brought to trial, highlighting the dangers of corruption. The 7 deadly sins confess their flaws, illustrating their influence on human behavior. Next, there's the Pilgrimage to Truth, where Piers makes his first appearance. This marks the beginning of the spiritual journey. Then we have Vita, or the Life, covering passus VII to XX in the B text. Here, the focus is on 3 key ideals: do well, which encourages living a virtuous, active life; do better, advocating for compassion and teaching others; and do best, aiming for the highest spiritual perfection. The narrative also includes the harrowing of hell and the Antichrist's assault, reminding us of the ongoing spiritual battles and the hope of salvation. Finally, we look at how Piers Plowman is organized. It's structured into a prologue and various passus, or sections, which help to organize this complex allegorical journey. This structure allows the poem to explore different themes in a systematic way, making its moral and spiritual lessons more accessible. Overall, this slide helps us understand the layered, allegorical framework of Piers Plowman, showing how it combines societal critique with spiritual reflection, all set within a structured narrative that guides us through the path to truth and righteousness. So on this slide, we're diving into what the poem Piers Plowman is really about. It's not just a story or a collection of episodes. It's a deep exploration of the themes that define the medieval worldview. The poem tackles issues like morality, social justice, and spiritual renewal, all woven into a rich tapestry of allegory. One of the main themes is the idea of moral and spiritual honesty, what it means to live a life aligned with divine truth. It also challenges the corruption and greed prevalent in society at the time, calling for reform and genuine faith. Connecting this to the overall theme of our presentation, Piers Plowman isn't just about medieval society. It's a critique that still resonates today. It invites us to reflect on our own values and the importance of integrity and social responsibility. So, understanding these themes helps us appreciate the poem's enduring relevance and its powerful message about human nature and societal change. Now, let's explore the poem's ethical framework, which revolves around active goodness, compassionate teaching, and episcopal perfection. These themes emphasize not just personal virtue, but also the importance of actively doing good, guiding others with compassion, and striving for spiritual perfection within the church hierarchy. The core idea is summarized in the phrase "do well, do better, do best," encouraging continuous improvement in moral and spiritual life. In this context, the poem targets church corruption, specifically priests who sell pardons, bishops neglecting their flocks, and friars deceiving the faithful. These figures represent the moral failings the poem seeks to critique and reform. Lady Holy Church, depicted as a divine figure, introduces truth as God himself. The poem becomes a spiritual quest to understand and live according to this ultimate truth, which guides moral integrity and genuine faith. A key symbol in the poem is Piers the Plowman, who embodies honest work and virtue. The message is clear: idleness is a sin, and honest labor is a divine calling. This idea links work to morality and spiritual fulfillment. Langland also bitterly criticizes the corrupt clergy, the idle rich, lazy poor, and dishonest merchants. The overarching message is that everyone has a role to play, and honest contribution is essential for a just society. The deepest question the poem raises is how a sinful person can achieve salvation. Here, Piers becomes a Christ-like figure, symbolizing the possibility of redemption through faith and virtue. All these themes, truth, work, social justice, salvation, are central to Langland's vision, reflecting his concern for moral integrity within society and the church. This slide highlights the major themes that weave through the entire work, emphasizing the importance of living a righteous life in pursuit of divine truth. On this slide, we see a vivid depiction of medieval society through Langland's eyes. At the top, we have lawyers who plead only for payment, not for justice. This highlights how some in the legal profession are seen as more interested in money than fairness. Next, we encounter those who refuse honest work, objects of moral criticism, like beggars and wastrels. In contrast, we have the plowmen, farmers, and honest workers who are portrayed as Langland's heroes, embodying virtue through their labor. Moving further, traders and craftsmen are shown, often accused of dishonesty, which reflects societal suspicions about trade and craftsmanship. Then we see merchants, who play a vital role in the economy but sometimes face distrust. Above all, there's the nobility, lords, and knights, who are expected to protect the realm but are also part of this complex social tapestry. We also have the clergy, bishops, priests, friars, hermits, whose character varies from pious to corrupt. This broad scene is a snapshot from the prologue, where the dreamer will surveys a fair field full of folk, representing the entire spectrum of English society. It's a powerful visualization of the different roles, virtues, and vices that coexist in medieval life, and it sets the stage for understanding the moral landscape Langland is exploring. In this slide, we see a brief and delicate treatment of the 7 deadly sins, each vividly personified. Starting with pride at number 1, which is depicted as someone arrogant in dress and manner. Moving to envy at number 2, portrayed through merchants and tradesmen eaten by jealousy. Then we have wrath at number 3, shown as a friar consumed by anger and malice. Next is greed at number 4, represented by a merchant who cheats and hoards. Gluttony comes at number 5 with a humorous scene in an alehouse highlighting excess. Sloth, at number 6, is illustrated by a priest who cannot say his prayers, emphasizing laziness or spiritual neglect. Finally, lust at number 7 is described as a person who cannot say his prayers, underscoring a struggle with temptation. This sequence is a powerful part of the poem, as each sin is not only listed but personified as a human type from medieval life, making the moral lessons more vivid and memorable. It's a striking way to show how these sins pervade everyday human behavior. Let's take a closer look at Langland's craft and poetic technique, focusing on allegory and literary devices. These elements are key to understanding the depth and richness of his work. Allegory, for instance, allows Langland to embed complex moral and spiritual messages within his narrative, making his poetry not just a story but a layered commentary. Throughout the poem, you'll notice how he employs various literary devices, metaphors, symbolism, and irony that enhance the reader's engagement and understanding. These tools help convey his themes more vividly and make his social and religious critiques more impactful. By analyzing his use of allegory and literary devices, we gain insight into how Langland crafts his verses to resonate on multiple levels, reinforcing the overall themes of morality, faith, and human nature. This technique is central to his poetic style and crucial for appreciating the depth of his work. In this slide, we see how Langland himself symbolizes humanity seeking salvation, representing the universal human soul on a quest for spiritual redemption. The dreamer, also known as Will, is our protagonist, an everyman figure who embarks on a journey guided by divine and moral forces. We encounter the forces of evil, which assault unity, symbolized here by the church, highlighting the ongoing spiritual struggle between good and evil. Antichrist appears as a major villainous figure, embodying falsehood and corruption that threaten true faith. Moving forward, honest labor, righteousness, and ultimately Christ himself are presented as the true path to salvation. Piers the plowman is not just a character, but a symbol of divine reason, preaching repentance and guiding the folk toward moral awakening. Next, reason, which represents our moral faculty, tries to weigh actions like mead, symbolizing reward, and serves as a moral compass for the dreamer. Conscience, on the other hand, is portrayed as the voice urging justice, but faced with threats like bribery and corrupt rewards that oppose true justice. Lady Mead embodies the true Christian church, the guiding authority that instructs the dreamer in the path of truth. Lady Holy Church, then, symbolizes the institutional church, acting as a moral and spiritual guide. Throughout the poem, Langland employs sustained allegory, meaning he gives abstract virtues, vices, and spiritual forces human form and personality. These personifications and symbolic figures engage in dramatic action, making the moral and spiritual lessons vivid and memorable. In essence, the allegory in Piers Plowman is a complex but powerful device that illustrates the moral and spiritual struggles of humanity, using concrete characters and symbols to explore abstract virtues and vices. Now let's take a closer look at Middle English alliterative verse and what makes it unique. This style of poetry is characterized primarily by its use of alliteration as a core structural element, rather than relying heavily on rhyme. It's a feature that really sets it apart and connects it to the oral tradition, where memory and oral recitation played a big role. In Middle English alliterative verse, you'll notice that each line is divided into two halves, with a set number of stressed syllables. The key is that at least one or more of the alliterating sounds, usually consonants, are repeated at the beginning of words in each half line. This creates a rhythmic, musical quality that was ideal for recitation and storytelling. This style also reflects a more flexible approach to rhythm and meter compared to later poetic forms, emphasizing the sound and cadence over strict rhyme. It's important because it shows us how language was used creatively in medieval England to engage audiences and preserve stories and history. Connecting this to the overall theme of our presentation, understanding Middle English alliterative verse helps us appreciate how language and style reflect cultural values, oral tradition, and literary innovation during that period. It's a fascinating example of how form and function come together in medieval poetry. Let's take a closer look at some of the distinctive stylistic features of Piers Plowman. First, you'll notice the frequent Latin quotations from the Bible and church fathers. These give the poem a very authoritative, almost clerical voice, emphasizing its moral and spiritual authority. Latin insertions appear throughout, highlighting the religious context and the learned tone of the text. Next, it's important to understand that Langland wrote in the dialect of the West Midlands, which is quite different from Chaucer's London English. This regional dialect is full of archaic forms, giving the poem an older, more traditional feel. It also helps us see the regional roots of the poem and its connection to the local speech of the time. Unlike Chaucer's rhymed verse, Langland's poetry doesn't rely on end rhyme. Instead, the music and rhythm come entirely from alliteration and the natural flow of the lines. This creates a different kind of musicality, more subtle but deeply rooted in the oral tradition. You'll also notice that each line is divided into two half lines by a pause, known as a caesura. This break is significant because it allows for a moment of reflection and emphasizes the alliterative pattern. The stressed syllables alliterate across this pause, which adds to the poem's rhythmic cohesion. This style is part of the 14th century alliterative revival in the West Midlands. It's a conscious revival of Old English poetic techniques, connecting the poem to a much older poetic tradition. So, in summary, Piers Plowman's form, its Latin insertions, regional dialect, alliterative structure, and use of caesura, serves to reinforce its authoritative tone and its roots in both religious and traditional English poetry. Let's take a closer look at Langland's prophetic voice. What we see here is how his work functions as both a religious and social commentary. He uses his poetry to speak out about the issues of his time, blending spiritual insights with observations on society. This dual focus allows him to challenge the status quo while also encouraging spiritual reflection. It's important to recognize that his prophetic voice isn't just about predicting the future, but about highlighting moral and social issues that he believed needed attention. This approach connects to the overall theme of the presentation by illustrating how literature can serve as a powerful tool for social critique and spiritual guidance. On this slide, we see a powerful moment from Passus VII, where the papal pardon is literally torn in two by Piers, which is a shocking and very anti-clerical gesture. It highlights how the poem criticizes the corruption within the church. We also see how priests are mocked if they can't say their paternoster, but can recite Robin Hood ballads. This points to a disconnect between religious duties and popular culture, emphasizing superficiality. Bishops who remain in London at court, instead of visiting their dioceses, are condemned as derelict shepherds, showing Langland's criticism of religious leaders neglecting their true pastoral responsibilities. Selling papal pardons is depicted as worthless unless accompanied by genuine repentance of the heart, underscoring the idea that true faith involves sincerity, not just buying forgiveness. The poem also attacks pardoners for selling confession and flattering the rich, because, as it says, "For they love flattery." This exposes the greed and dishonesty of those supposed to guide spiritual salvation. Friars are criticized for their greed and corruption, which erodes their spiritual integrity. Throughout all this, Langland, while deeply religious, is fiercely critical of the church institutions, seeing their corruption as a betrayal of Christ's message. This slide encapsulates the poet-preacher's sharp critique of the church's failings, emphasizing that true faith requires sincerity and integrity, not greed or superficiality. Did one man write Piers Plowman? That's a question that has intrigued scholars for a long time. The authorship of this medieval work is actually a bit of a mystery. Some believe it was penned by William Langland, while others suggest multiple authors might have contributed over time. This leads us into the broader authorship question, which explores whether a single voice can be identified behind the text, or if it evolved through different hands. Understanding this helps us grasp the cultural and literary context of the poem, and it also shows how medieval texts often reflect collective voices more than individual authorship. So, as we look at Piers Plowman, Keep in mind how questions of authorship tie into the themes of community, faith, and societal critique that are central to the poem. Back in 1908, J.M. Manley proposed that there were 5 different authors behind the various versions we have. He pointed out inconsistencies and what seemed like contradictions across the texts, which led him to suggest that different scribes or collaborators might have been involved. However, modern scholarship largely rejects this idea now. Today, we understand those inconsistencies as revisions made over time, rather than evidence of multiple authors. The multiple author theory suggested that each version was penned by a different person, but if you look closely, there are consistent thematic obsessions that appear across all the versions. Plus, all 3 texts share a distinctive stylistic fingerprint and dialect, which strongly indicates a single author. What's fascinating is that these versions show an evolving mind, continually returning to the same core problems, which suggests a single, reflective voice. This brings us to the current scholarly consensus. William Langland is the likely author. This was confirmed by the Trinity Dublin Memorandum, which explicitly names Langland as the author. So, the idea now is that we're dealing with a single author work rather than multiple writers. Throughout much of the 20th century, scholars debated whether all 3 versions were written by the same person or by different people. This debate is known as the authorship controversy, essentially asking, one author or many? And today, the dominant view is that it's one author, William Langland, whose identity is supported by stylistic and thematic consistency, as well as historical references like the memorandum. Let's take a moment to explore Langland's place in literary history. His work has left a significant mark on the development of English literature, particularly through his influence on later writers and the shaping of the English poetic tradition. When we consider his legacy and influence, it's clear that his pioneering use of vernacular language made literature more accessible to a broader audience, which was quite revolutionary at the time. His approach to social and moral criticism also paved the way for future writers to address important societal issues in their work. You can see how his themes of morality, religion, and social justice resonate even today. Overall, Langland's contributions helped establish a foundation for the English literary canon and inspired countless authors who followed. His work is a testament to the enduring power of honest, accessible storytelling that challenges and engages readers across generations. Piers Plowman remains the greatest poem of the alliterative revival and a foundational text of English social and religious literature. Its cultural legacy is immense, especially thanks to the Athlone Press critical edition from the 1960s to the 80s, which established a 3-text system for studying the poem. As a result, Langland studies have become a vibrant and flourishing academic field today. In terms of modern scholarship, scholars like W. W. Skeet played a crucial role by producing the first modern critical editions. These editions helped cement Langland's place within the literary canon, ensuring his work is studied and appreciated widely. The Victorian revival also brought renewed attention to the poem. It was reprinted in the 16th century and was claimed by reformers as a proto-Protestant work, especially as they challenged the Catholic Church's authority. During the Protestant Reformation, Langland's poem was often linked, sometimes unfairly, with rebellion. For example, the rebel priest John Ball echoed Piers Plowman's language, connecting the poem's themes with social upheaval. Specifically, during the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, we see how Langland's work resonated with the social unrest of the time. So, why does Langland still matter today? His legacy and literary influence continue to shape discussions around social justice, religious reform, and the English literary tradition. His work remains a vital touchstone for understanding the complexities of medieval society and the enduring power of literature to reflect and influence social change. And as the quote from Piers Plowman tells us, "For truth telleth that love is the triacle of heaven." This highlights how essential love is in the pursuit of spiritual salvation. Now, William Langland, the mind behind Piers Plowman, was a minor cleric from the West Midlands of England, living around the 14th century. His masterpiece, Piers Plowman, exists in 3 different versions, A, B, and C, and there are over 50 manuscripts that have survived to this day. The poem itself is an allegorical dream vision, and it delves into profound themes like salvation, justice, truth, and even calls for reform within the church. An important stylistic note is that Langland's use of alliterative verse places him at the height of the 14th century alliterative revival, a significant literary movement of the time. What makes Langland especially compelling is his fierce social and religious criticism. His work offers a vivid window into medieval life, with all its complexities and contradictions. In fact, Piers Plowman stands alongside Chaucer's Canterbury Tales as one of the two foundational pillars of Middle English literature, each capturing different facets of the medieval experience. To sum up, Langland's work not only reflects his poetic skill, but also his deep engagement with the social and spiritual issues of his time. It reminds us that love, truth, and justice are central to understanding both individual salvation and societal reform, an enduring message that resonates even today.